Okay. So welcome. We're back in business after our high holiday hiatus. Beginning again our classes, and before we stopped, we were examining different of the rabbis and other leaders of the rabbinic times, reading their stories and talking about their meaning. And today we'll go back to kind of a unique figure who comes even before Hillel, someone who was even before all the rabbis, but has a really interesting two stories. The two stories that inspired lots of thoughts, and I think I have at least two children's books that my kids have about Honi, and kind of captured people's imagination. So this is Honi the Circle Maker, so Honi the Circle Maker was not a rabbi. He's the only one. I guess he was before there were even rabbis, but there were kind of rabbis. But he was something else. He was his own. He was a circle maker, and we'll talk about that.
You could make a living making circles. That's
pretty
good.
Well, if you can do it the way he did it, then you're in business. But to be fair, back then most rabbis were not professional rabbis in any case. And the professional rabbis is kind of an invention of the Middle Ages. Until the Middle Ages, there were no professional rabbis, and so there's both positives and negatives to that equation, for another time. But we're back, and even though we were gone, we respect tradition. So therefore, Alan will get us started. Do you, David, Bonnie, and Diane, do you all have the materials? Okay.
Before we get started, is Honi thought to have been an actual person, or because I don't know, I guess whenever I've heard him talked about, it just seems more like it's a
legendary
thing.
It's a good question, but you could ask that question about many figures in the Talmud, because we don't have what we have is what we have, right? And they're all religious texts about them. But I think I'm sure that Honi lived, because there's enough stories about. I don't think any of the characters in the Talmud are made up. They're real people.
Mm-hmm.
And we have various different sources of him. He appears in Midrash. He appears in the Talmud, and he was a scholar too. So he kind of is like a rabbi, and there's a few places here and there where his kind of rulings appear. So that makes you think that he is a person. It's not like he's not just like they don't say we have a children's story about Honi. They say we have a story about a sage, a scholar who has teachings. So that makes you think. And he had children and grandchildren who always have stories about. So that makes you think he is also very much real. But he did kind of enter the popular imagination in that sense.
Okay.
So Charles, thanks for joining us. Do you have the materials, Charles, or?
I'm sorry?
Do you have the materials?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I was so glad to see you. I was so glad to see you in person.
Yes, well, same. The feeling is mutual.
Good. Wonderful.
Just real quickly, Charles and I sat at the same table at dinner. Charles and his wife Rosa and I were at the same table. And I looked at him, or he said, "Oh, now, we're not on Zoom finally." And I looked at him and I said, "Charles." And I recognized Charles and Rosa from, services years ago, but I never really knew his name and never connected him at services with him on Zoom. And I didn't connect him on Zoom and him at the table until I went, so that's my own little story. Okay,
Well, there was when I saw Charles and Rosa in the Senate, it also took me a few seconds to say, wait a second, this is the man behind the screen.
he's a lot taller than I thought from his Zoom profile.
So,
All right. Honi the Circle Maker and his progeny. I don't know what the FL stands for, but I assume it's second half of the first century before the Common Era. Our masters taught, once it happened that most of the month of Adar passed by and rain did not come down. So the people sent word to Honi the Circle Maker, pray for rain to fall. He replied, go out and bring in the ovens in which you roast the Paschal lambs, so that they do not disintegrate. He then prayed, but no rain fell. What did he do? He drew a circle, stationed himself within it, as the prophet Habakkuk had done. Habakkuk, who is quoted as having said, I will stand upon my watch and station me within a circle. Then Honi exclaimed before the Holy One, Master of the universe, your children have turned to me because they regard me as a member of your household. By your great name, I swear that I will not move from here until you have mercy on your children. At once, rain began to fall drop by drop. His disciples said, Master, only because of your merit have we been allowed to see you cause such a miracle without being struck dead. But it seems to us that the rain is coming down merely to release you from your vow. In reply, he exclaimed, not for this gentle rain did I pray, but for pouring rain that will fill cisterns, ditches, and caves. The rain immediately came down so furiously that each drop was the size of the mouth of a cask, and the sages estimated that no drop was less than a log in bulk. And I think if I'm looking at the bottom right, that's the equivalent of 6 eggs, or about 1 pint of water. Again, the disciples said, Master, only because of your merit have we been allowed to see you without being struck dead. But it seems to us that the pouring rain is coming down to destroy the world. Again, Honi exclaimed before God, it is not for this that I prayed, but for rains of benevolence, benediction, and grace. At once the rain moderated to a normal volume, but continued so steadily that all the people had to go up to the Temple Mount to escape the rising waters. Then they said to Honi, Master, just as you have prayed for rain to come down, pray for it now to cease. He replied, I have it by tradition that one may not pray for the cessation of superabundant good. Nevertheless, bring me a bullock for a thanks offering. They brought him the bullock. He laid both hands upon it and said to the Holy One, Master of the universe, your people Israel, whom you brought out of Egypt, cannot endure either superabundant good or superabundant punishment. When you are angry with them, they cannot endure it, and when you shower superabundant good upon them, they cannot endure it. May it be your will that the rain cease and there be relief for the world. Immediately, a wind blew, the clouds dispersed, and the sun shone. The people went out into the fields and began to gather mushrooms and truffles. Simeon ben Shettah sent word to Honi, were you not Honi, I would place you under a ban. But what can I do to you, seeing that you ingratiate yourself with him who is everywhere, who then grants you your wish, just like a son who ingratiates himself with his father, who then grants him his wish. Thus the son may say, Father, take me to where I may bathe in warm water. And he takes them there, to where I may shower in cold water. And he takes him there. Give me walnuts, almonds, peaches, and pomegranates. And he gives them to him. Of you, Honi, scripture says, thy father and thy mother is glad. Therefore the congregation of Israel that bore thee must likewise rejoice. Our masters taught, they who sat in the chamber of hewn stone, the Sanhedrin, sent the following missive to Honi the circle maker. Thou decreest a thing, and because of it, it is established. On the earth below you decree, and in heaven above the Holy One fulfills your word, and light shines upon thy ways. With your prayer you give light to a generation in darkness. When they were cast down, thou saidst, there is lifting up. With your prayer, you lifted the spirit of a generation that was cast down. The lowly person thou savest. With your prayer, you saved a generation whom sin brought low. Thou didst deliver him that is not innocent. With your prayer, you delivered a generation that is not innocent. Yea, it was delivered through the cleanness of thy hands. You, through the deeds of your clean hands, have delivered it.
Thank you. A rich story, right? An interesting story. What do you make of it? Where do we have any kind of initial comments?
Seemed like the Israelites couldn't be satisfied.
They couldn't be satisfied, but they were asking for something which was supernatural, and it got a little dangerous for them, right? Because it reminds me, it just came to my mind, what's that early Disney cartoon of Mickey with the when you're dealing with magic, it gets a little bit dangerous because you pray for something, but you got to make sure you pray for the right thing, or you can get in a little bit of trouble, right? So he prays, but you pray for rain, it can flood the entire place. Well, what do you make of Honi? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I can get a sort of a vision of what it must have been like with the videos that you see of the floods in the desert in Israel,
right,
where it just sweeps everything away, floods everything.
Yeah, the floods in Israel are pretty destructive because they're coming after the drought. I remember once I shared the story before, but there'd been no rain in 6 months in Israel, and I thought, well, I'm not even thinking of rain, so I left for the weekend. It was in October, and I left all the windows open, and so, of course, an hour after I'd set off to the north of the country, rain started to fall, and then it turned into a complete downpour, and my roommate came back to 3 inches of rain on the floor of the whole apartment. So that was, which I felt terrible about, but thank God they cleaned up and I didn't.
Well, we have not had rain in Spain in our area since December.
Well, that's because we didn't use a circle.
Well, I'm going to write to some of our friends
to use the circle.
To use the circle for sure.
What's the significance?
What do you make? What do you make of the circle?
Well, native tribes, they make circles all the time, and they dance and pray for whatever they need.
Mhm.
Classically, the magician stands within the circle, but the circle's the circle is a ring around him. So there's a ring around him, and the ring around him allows him, in some sense, maybe to focus something, to focus the power of the divinity or whatever it might be. But I haven't heard of circles being used in Jewish thought. It's very often the magical tradition has a huge story about circles, but not I've never seen that in Jewish thought before.
Well, it's interesting because I mean circles are important to us. We don't draw circles, but we dance with the Torahs in circles. On Simchat Torah, or on Sukkot, we take everything's been so become theological, right? But we take 4 plants, right? What do you do on Sukkot? You take 4 different plants and you bring them together with a lemon and you shake them around and you go around in the circle, shaking them around, right? That's not maybe not that different from drawing a circle around you in terms of its kind of ancient pagan, no, maybe not pagan, but magical quality. And the lulav and etrog, there's a whole teaching about every one of the 4 species comes from a different kind of vegetation. One's from the valley, one's from the wadi, one's from the mountains, one's from the this. So it made me think this year of the Navajos, right? Their medicine bags have something in them from the 4 mountains, the holy mountains. And so, there's some kind of linkage there. But you're right. This is not what we're used to seeing, at least in rabbinic thought, right? Usually they say, Avinu Malkeinu, or they make a prayer and then rain comes. But Honi draws a circle, and he brings up Habakkuk, but it's a little uncomfortable for anybody else. Have a reaction to the circle? Except let me try that at home. So he draws a circle, and he says, but he makes a vow right before God. He says, I'm not going to leave this circle until you make a rain. So what do you make of God's reaction to Honi in this whole story? Or the heavens' reactions to Honi? They just answers, right? Whatever he asks for automatically gives.
Well, he must have a sort of a dense connection to the forces of the divinity. And the connection is very dense because it sounds like his thoughts sort of initiated immediately.
He's obviously very, very, very intense connection, dense connection, and beloved of God, and at least that's how they can describe it at the end. But kind of an incredible man, right? I love it that he's not a rabbi, right? He doesn't have any formal authority. He's just a little guy on the outskirts. He's
a thinker.
He's something. He's a circle maker.
You know the story about the sorcerer's apprentice and what happened?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it's a little bit like that. What it's interesting because on one hand he's often seen as kind of somewhere between a rabbi and a prophet, right? Because his connection is denser than any of the other people we've seen in some ways. His ability to make a miracle happen is just very, very he has such a direct connection to God that it just follows immediately with his prayer. But my feeling from the reading the Bible is when God answers the prophets in the Bible, it's kind of always for good, right? I can't imagine one of the prophets praying and then they're creating something bad. But here it feels more magical, right? It feels more. This does feel more like a shamanistic, right? This is kind of a shamanistic kind of relationship where you have to make sure you say the right words. But here is, and he prays for rain. But his part, he's kind of innocent, right? Because he's just doing what the people are asking him to do. He's trying to be a good envoy, right? He says, the people know that I'm in your good words, in your good books, so I'm gonna do what they're telling me to do. So he's kind of absolving himself from the very beginning of any responsibility, right? He absolves himself. He says, they're asking me to do it. And then when the rain isn't what they want, they're saying, well, this is very nice, master, right? And we can't believe we saw this actually happen, but can you make it a little bit more, right? And so he prays a little bit more, and then it's really not what they want. And so then he has to do this other kind of trick, because he's saying he doesn't want to stop something that's well, first he prays for regular rain, but it's still not good. Still not what the people want. So what about the people? What do we make of the people's role in all of this? What's the moral for the people? Be careful what you wish for, or make sure you wish within careful language, or don't mess with Honi and God too much, because you're gonna regret it. Is it again this whole message we've been hearing of, the power? Miracles are something that are wonderful, but also a little bit frightening and not. Is this marking a transition from prophecy to scholarship? Another one where the miracles are both good but also destructive.
You say a transition between prophecy and scholarship where the miracles change. Say some more about that.
Well, we have this tradition that in biblical times there was prophecy, there was a sense of the prophets being able to make miracles, but with the destruction of the temple, there was a loss of that ability. And the rabbis have some powers, but it doesn't have that same power as in the biblical times. And so prophecy is the rabbis didn't have prophecy, so they tried to work it out through the power of their own minds, and they were able to contemplate, but they weren't prophets. They didn't have that very high level of spiritual attainment. But the question is, well, what's I mean, it's this the story. What would be the clear moral of the story? Or is there no moral? It's just saying the power, it's all about the power of Honi to make.
What was the comment about a ban? I sort of missed that somebody would be banned.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? So this reminds us of some of our other stories, right, where people are put in bans for doing miracles, right? And
right.
So the Shimon ben Shita, who was the leader of the generation, thought if you weren't Choni, I would excommunicate you, right? That's what the ban is. If you look at the note, right, God must have imposed a drought and punishment for Israel's transgressions, and pressing him to cancel his judgment would have been sinful. So there's something about the supernaturalism of Choni is both dangerous and not something the rabbis are very comfortable with. Ordinarily, if it wasn't you, we're going to place a ban on this kind of behavior because, first of all, they feel whatever is happening is merited. So there is a sense of messing with the natural order, right? That you really have a strong sense of. You mess with what the natural order is, you might not always be happy with the results, right? There's kind of there's a balance in the universe, and if you bring in your prayers to try and mess with the balance of the universe, then it reminds me of an old science fiction book, The Wizard of Earthsea. Has anybody read that book? It's Ursula Le Guin. It's old, but anyhow, it's an idea that you have balance in the world, and if you don't be so quick to mess with the balance because you end up in trouble. And if you come to the Israelites at the end of all of this and say, well, are you glad the Choni prayed for rain? I'm not sure what they would say because it wasn't such an easy ride for them. But he doesn't excommunicate him.
I don't know if the choice of words here is kind of strikes me because of the English chosen. I don't know if it says the same thing
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Hebrew, but where Simeon ben Shetah said to Honi, were you not Honi, I would place you on your band, but what can I do to you, seeing that you ingratiate yourself with him who is everywhere?
Yeah,
Like a son who ingratiates himself with his father.
yeah,
I mean, it's not like he said, you know, Sony, you're a good man and God's gonna reward you for this. It's like, it's almost like there's something devious or, you know, Honi was doing this specifically to get something, as opposed to, you know, he's got some ability to communicate with God and ask God for what he wants and then hopes that God's gonna give it to him.
it might be more the English here, because here my sense of it is maybe there is a little fear of Honi, like I don't want to mess with Honi because you've got the direct connection, so I don't want to see what happens if I place you under a ban. But there might also be, but I think there's also a certain sense of admiration. You know, you're so close to God, you've so ingratiated yourself with God that whatever you say comes true. And we've been praying for rain forever and nothing happened. And the second you say the word, so there is a sense of you're a very special person. I don't want to. It's almost. I'm not saying you're a good person. I think he's beyond being a good person, right? It's being a good person makes him. You can put him in a box, but here there's no box that can hold Honi. Honi is just someone who's so close, so beloved by God, that I mean, it's an amazing example of what it means to be to be that close to God. To God listens to one, and you know, there's a you see this. I love this midrash about, you know, it's like someone who says, you know, you say to your parent, you know, bathe me in warm water, and the parent does it. Show me cold water, give me this, give me that, and that's kind of, there's something about being spoiled there, but there's also something about the a really beloved child, you know, and when you do everything else right, you know, maybe that's what it is too. Honi does everything else. When you have such a close relationship to someone, you can ask them for anything, right? It's like, who'd you call when you really need something, right? So when you're asking for a big favor, you know, you can't call the person you barely know, right? You can't call the person who you barely know and say, you know, can you lend me $10,000? They'll say, you know, I'm sorry, I just can't do that, right? You can ask your neighbor for eggs and sugar and maybe, you know, even to watch your house when you're away. But if you walked and said, you know, can you lend me $10,000? I'll say, you know, I'm not the right person for you to ask me unless you've really built that relationship. And so if you don't have that relationship with God, then you say, God, you know, please make water appear. God will say, okay, well, I'll just store your prayer with the other 10 million prayers I have from everybody else. But if you have that really, really close relationship, then, and so to have the relationship where you're given everything just shows how absolutely beloved you are. And it's, you know, on Yom Kippur, I was talking about, you know, having the colonoscopy friends, right? The people who will take you to colonoscopy. That's that's one level of friendship, because you have to stay there while you have your thing and then take you back, right? But then there's a level of friendship, or who are your friends who do the next level, and it's a smaller and smaller circle. So who are the people that God responds to and is willing to create this kind of imbalance in the world? Not too many. So they're kind of saying, well, Honi is useful to have around, right? So we're not going to excommunicate Honi because we want Honi around. Like, look at this, whatever he asked for, God made happen. And we know that not too many, not the parents have any favorites, but there's not too many children the parents will give absolutely anything to them when they ask. You know, they've got to be in pretty good behavior otherwise to take you from one thing to the next like this and give you anything.
No, you can give them too much and spoil them, and then you have problems.
then you have
Like
problems.
or you don't know if you have some power and you don't know what the limits are and to what point it might be damaging or prejudicial, then
Yeah,
But Honi's relationship or his ability to do that, it strikes me as very curious because it bespeaks of a magical relationship with nature rather than a personal relationship with God, I think. But I'm not sure that I can really tell the difference between those two things. But the being in a circle means that he's using sort of not artificial devices, but he's using some sort of intellectual device that he's discovered within himself, tinkering within himself, to be able to bring this particular power down from the heavens.
he's trying to control. He's trying to control nature.
Right. There's more of a control thing than a son
Magical.
asking for a favor.
Sure.
So he has his hand on the switch, so to speak, and this is different than somebody who prays, somebody who's beloved of God, somebody who loves God. He doesn't have his hand on the switch. He can't absolutely rely on that his prayer is going to come out, but Honi can, because Honi knows the inner workings of nature, so he can do this. And I think the clue of that is the circle business.
Sure. No, this.
Yeah.
Right.
Phil,
So-
go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Diane.
So, I mean, the circle thing, I mean, I don't know this reference to Habakkuk, because I never read Habakkuk. I mean, I know him, but so I don't know what happened there with the circle, but it
Mhm.
appears to me that, so the thought in my mind, though, is whatever happened there, he said, oh, I should follow that example of what happened in Habakkuk rather than this being a magical thing. You know what I'm saying? So what happened in Habakkuk? How did he take this out of what happened with the circle in Habakkuk?
Let's look it up. Let's read it. I'm not sure. I don't think you can get any more than a quote, but maybe I'm wrong. I can't. I remember looking this up once, but if you look, so I'm going to go to Sepharia, look up Habakkuk 2:1, right? All right. Habakkuk. Okay. So Habakkuk says, I will stand on my watch, take up my station at the post, and wait to see what God will say to me. What will be the reply to my complaint? God answered me and said, write the prophecy down, inscribe it clearly on the tablet so it can be read. For there is yet a prophecy for a set term, a truthful witness for a time that will come, even if it tarries, wait for it still, for it will surely come without delay. So it seems to me it's just a way that Habakkuk is using to call upon God.
Yeah, apparently it doesn't make a reference to a circle, but in the text that we're reading from, it's the first verse it references, so maybe it's standing at my guard post and stationing myself on a rampart. Apparently he didn't have a rampart.
Let me look at the Hebrew, yeah.
So he drew a circle.
Well, I think there's both of those there, but there's, let me just see, why is this? Yeah. Let's look at the commentary. This is what Rashi says, on my watch I will stand. Habakkuk dug a circular hole, stood within it, and said, I will not budge from here until I hear what he will say to me. Concerning this, my question why he looks and sees the prosperity of a wicked man. So that's interesting. Kind of Habakkuk, what Habakkuk is saying is that what Rashi is interpreting is Habakkuk is saying that there's some divine injustice here. So he's right. He created a little hole, a circular hole, and got in and said, "There's a divine injustice. Why is a wicked man thriving?" Kind of thing. And this is also what Honi is saying. Why are the people suffering under a drought? This is a divine injustice. So in that sense, Honi is in that tradition of prophets and of rabbis. But there is something still, I agree, the circle maker, and we'll read his other big story in a minute, which also has some of that element of the magic in it. I mean, one interesting element about the story, and it's actually a really important story for another reason in later Jewish thought, and it becomes a kind of proof text for a rabbinic idea of the golden mean, of like we want something that's the Greek idea, but becomes also a Jewish idea. We want to be in the middle, right? We don't want too much of one thing or not enough of the other. We don't want too much rain. We don't want too little rain. We need just the right amount of rain, and we want to live in almost like the Buddhist, the middle path or the middle way. We want to live in a place of balance. And it's an interesting story coming from Honi, who's this kind of, as I was saying, a transition figure between prophet and rabbi, and that the rabbis very much believe in this balance, right? The rabbis are freaked out when the balance is out of balance because they live in a very difficult world of exile, of oppression, so when you're in that kind of world, you need the balance even more. But we've seen again and again the rabbis, they're a little worried about things that are a little too intense, right? They want things to be rational, they want things to be in balance and harmony. And so we see here Honi, the power of Honi is an amazing power, but it also is teaching us, even in Kabbalah, you have this idea of balance. And there's this idea in Kabbalah that the very pinnacle of the universe is a kind of balance, scales, right? Our scales, and in the scales are balanced all the energies of the world, and they have to be in balance. When they're in, I wrote my rabbinic dissertation on this idea actually, but that the whole world is in balance, and when the forces are all in balance, and it creates life, it creates blessing in the universe. When things are out of balance, the whole universe is out of balance. We all participate in that balance, but also trying to create balance within ourselves. But this story was one of my proof texts for my thesis, actually, I remember now. So it's that and this is an early rabbinic text that talks about that need for balance, right? Because you learn you can't have too much, you can't have too little. It needs to be just right. If not, you suffer, right? And that's kind of what it means.
But being right in the center, right in the dead center, is not being in balance either. It's being nowhere at all. The dead center actually is the place of transcendence of everything. Logic disappears right at that particular moment.
That's where Honi is.
Right.
That's not what people are. The people are just receiving the end of his. He's entering that place beyond space and time,
right,
and
right,
disrupting the universe. And the people are they're caught. What do we do with this? And it causes them a few troubles, right? They're causes flooding and the supernatural rain with raindrops that are the size of this owl. I can't do.
Uh-oh.
Okay. We lost Phil in the process. He's back.
You move that, you cast the spell, Phil disappeared.
Yeah, Phil, we next.
I'm sorry, everyone was frozen on my screen, and I'm sorry.
You
So maybe I
moved the camera, and somehow that spell cast you away. that you came back.
I deserved it. I was so late and for technical problems. I'm sorry. You should have drawn a circle around it though. I just wanted to ask, because it's such a fascinating and puzzling text. You have the circle as a kind of, here's a person with apparently seen to have enormous power, meaning some kind of direct connection with the divine, and the circle maybe put a limit so he doesn't overstep. I don't know, but at least there's a suggestion of limits in connection with what you said about balance, which I very much see more as a Hellenistic idea than as a Hebrew idea, although you can find cases. But I wanted to ask about the last paragraph, and I hope if this was already discussed, I apologize, about the Sanhedrin, who seem to be making a decision saying that this man is a kind of special
They gave him a special dispensation, right? Or a special, he had a special status.
Special status, but it's as if he can almost bind. It's sort of like in the Gospels. What I bind on, what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What you loose will be loosed. It's a very he's speaking there. That's Jesus of Nazareth speaking to disciples who will be, the next generation's priests. And here it's as if the Sanhedrin is giving him a special status and declaring that he has it. I mean, and I wonder if this is if you can say anything at all about why this is there, about the Sanhedrin kind of putting an official seal on it, rather than just say, I would place you under a ban, but what can I do? You're this special person.
I mean, let's think about it this way, right? This is a passage in the Talmud, right? This is sugya in the Talmud, and so the way this, at least on some level, people will think about the Talmud is, on some level, there is a discussion one day in Babylonia, or in Jerusalem, because it appears in both, but this one is more in, and people are discussing Honi, and at a certain point, right, they bring up this whole story, and then at the end, so what is our masters taught? That's a baraita, right? So somebody's bringing a proof, a text, right? We have an old tradition going back to the first rabbis. That's what our masters taught means, that the Sanhedrin gave him this special missive. I wish I had the Hebrew in front of me to look up what the missive is, but so the rabbis preserved the story of him being protected from, this is first of all a further protection of excommunication for messing around with the universe a little bit, but he's also he's being praised for his, and given the special status by the Sanhedrin hold the law, hold the reason, hold the logic, and they're kind of saying you're beyond what we do, right? You're beyond what we do. You're something, and then it's amazing that they sat in the chamber of hewn stone, right? They sat in the temple, right? They sat in the temple and made this missive. So there's something about this extraordinary power of Honi Magal, that they're sanctioning it and saying we approve of it because it's ordained by God, it's divine, right? It's very different in the story we read last of what happens to Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, who's kind of excommunicated for bringing miracles and who's pushed aside, but this is something else. Honi is given. Let's read the next story, because I want to be able to wrap that up before. Who would like to read number 7?
I'll read it, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Number 7, right?
Yeah.
Rabbi Yochanan said, through all the days of that righteous man, he was troubled about the meaning of the verse, a song of ascents. When the Lord brought back those that returned to Zion, we were like unto them that dream. Is it possible for a man to doze off and dream continuously for 70 years? But the
Because it
following
says,
incident clarified the verse's meaning for him. One day, as he was walking on the road, he saw a man planting a carob tree. He asked him, "How long will it take this tree to bear fruit?" The man replied, 70 years. He asked, "Are you quite sure you will live another 70 years to eat its fruit?" The man replied, "I myself found fully grown carob trees in the world. As my forebears planted for me, so am I planting for my children." Once when Honi sat down for a meal, sleep overcame him and he dozed off. During his sleep, a grotto formed itself about him and hid him from sight, so that he continued sleeping for 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a man gathering the fruit of that same carob tree. He asked, "Are you the man who planted this tree?" The man replied, "That was my grandfather." Next, when Honi saw the herds ascending from his own she-ass, he exclaimed, "No doubt I slept for 70 years. He went to his home and inquired, "Where is the son of Honi the Circle Maker?" He was told, "Honi's son is no longer in this world, but his grandson is." At that he announced, "I am Honi the Circle Maker," but no one believed him. Next, he went to the house of study where he overheard the sages say, "This tradition is as clear to us now as it was in the days of Honi the Circle Maker." For whenever he came to the academy, he would settle any difficulty the sages had. Hearing these words, he cried out, "But I am Honi." Since the sages neither believed him nor accorded him the honor due him, he was so mortified that he sought God's mercy and he died. Rava observed, "For this reason mortals say, the fellowship of men or the fellowship of death."
this is a story that's often in children's books. But it's not a very pleasant experience for Honi in the end, is it? You know, of course the lesson that the children's book teaching is always about, planting something, you plant something and you don't know when you're going to harvest it, and you should always plant even though you may not live yourself to see the harvest. But how does that lesson relate to his experience and his unpleasant experience of waking up and nobody believes him or knows him? What?
Well, he went too far, it sounds like,
Exactly.
in his sleep, he transcended the space-time manifold and got shot 70 years into the future, so to speak. And that must have been a very interesting experience for him, for sure, but it killed him in the end.
There is something there about the danger of power, right? So like he has this power where he wonders things, and so we know that whatever he wonders kind of comes to be. So he wonders, how can 70 years be like a dream? And somehow it happens to him. But it's interesting because then this story, right? His story is interpreted with a whole bunch of other stories. Rava, one of the kind of much later, not much later, but the peak of Babylonian rabbis, a whole series of teachings about how important friendship is and how friendship is, fellowship is a very important thing. So when he doesn't have any friends, he doesn't have any understanding from his fellow human beings, he'd rather die. He doesn't matter he's in the future, it doesn't matter who he is, but he
It strikes me that the first part of the story is the very rational and familiar idea of working to provide for the next generation. And we have that shows up in many different places, and not just in our tradition. And then when he sleeps, then we get into a different world. And he he's unable to comprehend why they should be not believing him, when of course nobody would. And so it's as if he's not really, in a way, he's not attached to the totally to the world that we all understand, and he can't go to that other world and stay here.
Is it a little bit like the orchard, the divine orchard, or maybe, but I mean, it's interesting that it comes with this verse about the return from exile and being as dreamers.
Well, 70 years of exile.
Yeah. I'm not sure what to make of that. I mean, 70 years is a substantial amount of time. That's a lifespan. 70 in general in rabbinic thought is considered to be a lot, right? We talk about the 70 nations, the 70 languages of the earth. That was their way of marking infinity in some ways. Not here in that same, but it's not 40, right? 40 is a big number for us too. But I mean, it's interesting. He's the one questioning the supernatural thing of, first of all, is it possible for man to doze off and dream continuously for 70 years? Why is he questioning that? What kind? Such a strange question, right? It wouldn't be my question on that psalm, but even if it was, it's a bit of an odd. The whole thing is a bit odd.
Well, maybe it's talking about our lives too. I mean, are we dreaming this thing? Or are we awake? Or are we asleep? Something like that. I mean, it may be raising some kind of deep, thorny existential questions that are unanswerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's nice, right? It's 70 years is kind of like the lifespan of a person, right? So it's where you spend 70 years on earth, it's all like a dream, and then what happens? That's
I mean, being able to tell the difference between a dream and waking life is strictly a social thing. I mean, as youngsters, we're taught that the time when after we close our eyes, even though we have experiences that are completely real to us while we're in that state, your mother comes to you and says, that is a dream. Okay, so you're taught at a very early age to distinguish between the socially constructed life of the present, of the being with other people, and this thing that we call a dream. Now, maybe, I don't know, Honi I see as a tinker, a guy who fiddled with himself and discovered these things and discovered these sort of magical powers that he had. And then at the end, gets sort of thrown out of the rational world for 70 years, which is, I mean, a just end for the guy, actually.
well, go ahead.
Oh, I'm kind of thinking about it not as deeply as David, but Honi went to sleep. He woke up 70 years later, and nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
And you hope, I think, that you will be remembered in the future.
Well, he is remembered.
He is remembered.
Because
He is
we're
remembered.
reading about him, so he's been remembered.
He
But
is
even
remembered
in his own later day, he's remembered. It's so striking that they cite his authority or his power of analysis, right? And they just don't recognize the man or can't believe he's him.
They don't believe that he could possibly be the same person
So
Right.
from 70 years ago.
So
Not that he was forgotten.
it's interesting
Okay.
because for many people, what is it that you leave in this world after you pass away? The best is your legacy, right? You leave your legacy, and because what else do you have to leave? You go on to something else, but you leave the people who come after you, right? Your family, and maybe a sense of who you were and what you achieved, and we don't all achieve what Honi achieved, but something like that. And that's kind of, but he's questioning that at the very beginning, right? Because he's like saying, well, he doesn't understand it, but isn't this obvious that you plant a tree so the others will harvest it? But he's not working within that paradigm of what most people care about, which is legacy, planting the trees for the next generation. He's this, David's saying, he's tinkering, he's having fun. Everybody else is planting trees for the next generation. But on the other hand, in the end, that legacy thing is meaningless because, okay, they're talking about him and the trees are planted and his donkeys of progeny, but it doesn't replace what really matters, which is sense of fellowship and of closeness. And there's something interesting there. I'm not sure I'm fully articulating it, but there's something about legacy, something about what human life is about, something about the place of the divine and the spirit within all of it. So I think we're going to stop here. And as I mentioned earlier, next week we're not going to be meeting because I'll be at the mikveh helping two new Jews join our tradition after 1300 were murdered, but we'll see everybody in 2 weeks, we'll be continuing studying, I think, unless I decide to suddenly change it out of nowhere. We'll continue to study the leaders of the early rabbis.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the thought-provoking discussion.
Thanks. Okay, bye.